you doing, Muse?
Pretty good, pretty good. For those of you, since it's our inaugural episode again, technical difficulties previously, but welcome to the Bees and Buse podcast, where we talk about fun geek stuff like gaming, comics, TV, pretty much any sort of geek thing you can imagine. We try to generally keep it positive, as we find that there's a lot of negativity in the space recently. But we're really just a couple of old college friends just sitting down, talking, having a conversation.
Yeah, pretty much. So this week, we're going to be talking about the D6 system. For those of you who aren't into RPGs, some of this is going to be a little bit boring, but I figured I'd start with some background, and we'd go from there. How's that sound?
Sounds perfect.
So, we'll start at the beginning. In the 1970s, the role-playing genre was created by accident by a couple of wargamers who were simulating individual combat for their wargaming. And they added in an element of magic in a magical system that they could set up rules for. And, wow, that washed me out real quick. You probably know this system. It wasn't called this at the time, but it would eventually become D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons was not created to be a role-playing game. It was created to be a war game. It's why the rules for D&D First Edition really don't support role-playing. And the first game, then when they came out with a Games Master Guide, which had some role-playing advice in it, still in First Edition. And then in Second Edition, they refocused on the rules and getting the rules to be more exacting and precise, so they knew exactly what they were doing, and you had clarifications for every instance, so everybody was on the same page, and all the rules worked great. Now, when you're playing an MMO, like World of Warcraft, that's wonderful, because you don't have to deal with any of the rules. But when you're sitting at a table, and you actually have to roll the dice for every single rule, and the dice change. Sometimes they're 4-sided, sometimes they're 20-sided, sometimes they're 10-sided. For all these different roles, yeah, there you go. It becomes tedious. Very tedious. I played Second Edition D&D a long time ago. We couldn't. It was too much. We had to cut the rules down. But it was so popular still because nobody had ever done anything like role-playing before. You had a character and grew over time. You had individual adventures. They were tailored to what you did. It's a pretty amazing experience. It's a lot of fun. I recommend it. The system that Buse introduced me to in college was the Star Wars D6 West End Games, the first Star Wars role-playing system. West End Games created the D6 system, and when they created their system, it was built for role-playing. Their idea was keep everything moving. We want it to go fast. It's not super fast, but it was a lot faster than Second Edition D&D, which is what it outcompeted in the marketplace. At one point, for a couple of years there, West End Games D6 was the best-selling role-playing system in the world. Second Edition D&D didn't do that well. In fact, it did so well, the company went under and was bought out by Wizards of the Coast in 1996, 1997. West End Games at the same time did not renew their Star Wars license right at that same time, about 97, and Wizards of the Coast also bought the license from Lucasfilm for Star Wars at the same time. And that's where the D20 system came from. D20 uses one 20-sided die, and then you roll other dice for your damage. But most of your die rolls in Dungeons & Dragons from 3rd edition on, from the Wizards of the Coast edition on, you roll one D20. And they did the same thing with Star Wars when they took over Star Wars. But the D20 system is actually based off of the original D6 system that West End Games came up with. You will not find an exact copy. You can say the same thing in a different way when you're writing either a paper for school and it's not plagiarism, or if you're writing a new role-playing system and you want to use the exact same rules. As long as you don't write them with the exact same language, you are not plagiarizing. There's no copyright violation. That actually became a big deal with Wizards of the Coast D&D about a month and a half ago with their open gaming license. That came out. That was, anyway, a lot of negative things to say about that open gaming license 2.0, and I don't really want to say too many negative things, and we want to get to today's topic. So, Hughes introduced me to D6 role-playing. It is a blast. It's very easy to learn. It's not the easiest system out there, but for the amount of work, what you need to know compared to what you can do with it, it is, in my opinion, the most versatile system out there today. I've been playing with this since about 1998, 99. So the first game I played with him, college, as soon as I started playing with it, and whoa, I'm losing my, there we go. Hey, now I got more hands in the picture. So as soon as I started playing with him, I needed to read the rule book again, and we're arguing over rules. We spent almost as much time arguing over rules as we did. Not in that first game. We did do some rule arguing. The second game the two of us played together, I GM'd. I had played one game so far, and I'm like, that's it. I'm running the next one. I've been reading all these rules, and I bought all these supplements, and I bought them cheap at a used bookstore. So we went, and the second game we ran, I was already changing the system. I already needed to start manipulating it, trying to figure out how it worked. And that would lead over the years to me creating a number of different systems. Some of them you can find on rankmorepit.com in the forum section, which is the website for D6 these days. It's still one of the most used these systems in the world, even though there's been very little publishing done in the D6 world lately. Mini D6 came out a few years ago, and they're putting out some supplements, but there's no major license out. And anyway, about 10 years ago, I came up with a superhero role-playing system designed around creating X-Men style characters for the superheroes. And I didn't want to GM it. I didn't want to run the game because I wanted to try and break the game. Because when you're playtesting a game, you want to push it to its limits and see how well you can break it. And we broke it a couple times.
Just a few.
Yeah, it's a good system. It's hard to break. But in playtesting it and having a good time doing it, I came up with a really decent system, and Buse has been using it lately. He's been thinking about it, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
Yeah.
Do you want to do any history to catch people up to where you and I are, or do you want to jump right into where the system is and what you're doing?
Talk a little bit about the history. I mean, B's mentioned a few things, like it was some of the top, like one of the top selling and kind of out to D&D. But when talking about licenses, at one point, West End had
It really destroyed D&D Second Edition. I'm sorry, it did. And since we can't talk over each other or we'll screw up the microphone, we are not tech geniuses here. I'm going to shut up now.
Yes, I only pretend to be a tech genius for my job. But yeah, so
Yeah,
but
sorry.
yeah. Oh no, it's fine. But with West End, there was like Ghostbusters, Men in Black. Oh gosh, I'm not gonna go through the whole list, but like Ghostbusters, Men in Black. They had some they had Hercules. They had DC Universe. They had a lot of... Yes, they did have DC Universe.
They did. It was awful. Hercules was interesting. Ghostbusters was great. Their Bugs Bunny thing was brilliant. Ghostbusters was the first system to use D6. And I didn't play Men in Black. I started reading it, and I don't know where I put the book. And I'm going to shut up.
No, it's fine. I remember going into the comic book store, and that was actually the name of the place. It was literally called the comic book store. That was the name of the place. It's where I bought all my comics, and it's where I was like, oh, they have a role-playing section. And, yeah, and then they had a big D&D section. A pretty well-filled-out Star Wars section. And then in the little bitty corner in the back, they had the rest of the D6 books. And that's where I saw the Ghostbusters, Hercules, Men in Black. Apparently, they also had Indiana Jones. I never saw the DC Universe one. I did remember seeing Cyber Troopers, but I didn't pick it up. But yeah, they had quite a few. But anyways, so for me, I started playing it. I somewhat introduced it to a mutual friend of ours when I was younger, just doing single, like, one-on-one play sessions. When I was in high school, someone else there played as well, and we ran a couple of groups. We ran like pretty much a group that started as fighter pilots towards the end of New Hope for Star Wars. It was a lot of fun time, and like Beast said, introduced him to it in college, and had a lot of fun. Helped him play test his superhero rule set for the game. Played around with it a little bit myself. Played around a little bit with the Transformers rule set that somebody else had written up, which unfortunately is no longer online. But go ahead.
It was the High King. I want to give him credit. I actually played with him on a message board, and his Transformers game helped me understand, because I was already playing with the system at that point, but reading through what he did was brilliant, and it opened up especially how scale works. And like scale, what we're talking about there is, if you've seen a Star Wars movie, which you probably have, you don't want to have to roll a million dice when you're playing in a bigger vehicle, because a starfighter is going to do a lot more damage than a person. So if a starfighter shoots at a person, you're going to have to roll more dice to do more damage. And a person's going to be harder to hit than another starfighter or something of equivalent size. So they created scale. And so with Star Wars, you can go from person all the way up to the Death Star, technically, in scale. And two things of the same size they don't use as much dice. And yeah, we're not getting into all the detail here. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's fine. But yeah, that Star Wars is what, Star Wars and D6 system is probably the RPG system I'm most familiar with. After that, it would be D&D Edition 3 or 3.5. And, I played a little bit of that, and whenever I play D&D with my friends, all of us are roughly the same age. We're kind of getting a little older there. But yeah, we tend to play that because that's what we grew up with. And funny thing is, you even talk to people. Most people's favorite edition of D&D who play D&D, it's the version they played first or longest. I've found, at least from personal opinion, from talking with people. Anecdotal evidence, as they may say.
So
go ahead.
I also I got so good at manipulating this system and understanding it that at one point I wrote up a Star Trek, converted it all over to Star Trek. Yeah, he loved that game. I had 2 players, and it was probably the best game I ever ran according to my players. Views being one of them.
Hmm.
And it was fun, but it took me less than a week. Like that conversion took me less than a week. I knew exactly what I was doing. Um, so let me get a little bit into how the superhero game works. So, no, to do that, I got to explain how the real game works. Sorry, guys. So, like D&D up through at least third edition, you have attributes, and those attributes affect how well you roll on your skills. Um, so what I did with the superhero game was I came up with how the different powers work, and I gave you roughly 9 attribute dice. And in D6, when I say dice, where the only die you ever roll in D6 is a six-sided die. Okay, one of these. You've seen them a million times. You use them in craps. You use them in Monopoly. When you say dice, it's the die people think of. And yeah, so when you have a better skill, you roll more dice. That's the essence of the system. So when you're a superhero, and this really helped me understand min-maxing a lot. When you're a superhero, you're going to be great at certain tasks, and you're going to be average on other tasks because you're still a hero, or maybe you'll be above average on certain things. But if you've got like, if you're like Spider-Man, when you're rolling your strength, you've got a lot. Well, Spider-Man's a bad example because I built this for the X-Men. So when you're rolling as Wolverine and you got the claws out, that wouldn't be much more damage than a person with a sword. But his regeneration factor, that most people don't even get that to roll. Or his heightened senses. Like instead of rolling a regular perception roll, he gets to roll a lot more dice because of his animalistic heightened senses. You've all seen Wolverine, Hugh Jackman, the old dancer running around. Anyway,
Now, before we go too much further, uh, while some people out there might understand, it might actually be good because if you're going to start talking about attributes and senses and perception, you might want to actually go over the base attributes that most of the D6 systems use.
all right. There's 6 attributes in D6: strength, dexterity, mechanical, knowledge, perception, and technical. Under those are your skills. So, like under strength would be brawling, under dexterity would be shooting, under perception would be like bargain. Um, Under mechanical are your how good you are with machines, so like driving or flying. In Star Wars, when you hop in a starship in a starfighter like an X-wing or a TIE fighter, you're rolling your skills under mechanical for most of that. Um, Technical is fixing stuff or building stuff for the most part, and knowledge are your knowledge skills. So they're things that now there's some overlap here because knowledge has survival in it, which some people would argue that it should be technical, but survival is knowing how to survive in the land. But there's also some building aspects to it. Like you would think it would be technical to chop down a tree with with a piece of stone or flint or whatever, but that would actually be under knowledge because it's under survival. So you got to be a little bit flexible. The system isn't as rigid as D&D was. And D&D is also not as rigid as it used to be. Well, 4th edition. Anyway, I don't want to get bogged down too much in this. So you've got, those are your attributes. So when creating superpowers, if you wanted super strength, you would give them more strength dice to roll when they do a strength check, or when they're doing damage with their fists or whatever. And when you're doing like a dex check would just add to that. But if you're going to shoot laser beams out of your eye, you have to come up with a whole new way to do that, which wasn't that hard to do. I didn't want, when building for an X-Men scenario, you're not looking to create a Superman-style character. Superman is just too powerful to fit in that world. He would be a different scale. Oh, that's awful. Because Cyclops shoots his optic blasts out of his eyes, but Superman not only has laser eyes, he's got frost breath, and he can fly, and he's super fast, and he's super strong, and he's invulnerable, and he heals incredibly fast, and he has a super memory, and yeah, he's a lot. He's a lot of a lot. And that's okay, but that wasn't the kind of game I was trying to make. I was trying to make a game where, yes, some people have powers, but you could also be a normal person and be compete's the wrong word, but that's close to it, viable. Like somebody like Batman or Captain America isn't going to be out of place with this rule set.
Or horn-rimmed glasses from Heroes, for those of you who watched that back in the day.
Yeah. There are people who you're not going to be able to stop with a shotgun, but most of the heroes would be able to be stopped with a shotgun, or at least kept up with body armor. And like a SEAL is going to probably beat a brand new hero who's never done any combat training in his life in this system. Yeah.
Yeah, and just because you can blow apart a building with your mind, it doesn't mean that you can't be sucker punched.
Right. So you don't already automatically start with invulnerability. And invulnerability isn't really invulnerability. It's more like durability. It has its limits. So, yeah. Roughly... So if you took... I had a whole D system. So there's 18 attribute dice with a maximum of 4D for a regular human. In any one of those attributes. So if you do the math, there's 6 attributes and 18 dice. That averages out to 3 dice per attribute. But you can place them, so if you want a stronger character, you give them 4 dice. But if you use 4 dice there, you're going to have another stat. One of your other attributes is not going to be able to be 3D anymore. And you can break it down. There's 3 pips to a die. So you do 1D plus 1, 1D plus 2. And what that means is you roll 1 dice, and you add 1 to it, or you add 2 to it. When you get to 1D plus 3, instead of 1D plus 3, it's 2D at that point. So what I did is I let people take 1 dice in super skill and super strength, or one of the other attributes, would allow you to roll an additional 3 dice whenever you do a strength check. Or 1 dice of dex would allow you to add 3 dice to your dex check. So like shooting or dodging or melee combat. That's pretty. We're pretty geeky today. Last time we kept it lighter and breezier, but we're going to get into some geekier stuff too. So what I did was I created a system. I made a whole bunch of powers. Basically, anything you saw in the X-Men up to about the year 2000, except for characters like Apocalypse is too powerful, Sinister was too powerful, but any of the main roster X-Men, you could pretty much create any of them with. I had a phasing ability, I had a super speed, flight. So somebody like Angel, who has a flight ability, was not outclassed by other characters. Like, if you didn't take flight, you didn't get flight. Like, just because you can manipulate magnetism doesn't mean you automatically could fly. So what Buse has started to do, I don't know when you started working on this, but he's started to expand it to the rest of the Marvel Universe so that we could start other characters around the same power level. You want to take over, or?
Yeah, so my thought after playing this game, which I loved, and as Bees will tell you, I ran a few games with some of our mutual friends, and
a couple of games without me.
That is true. My wife and another friend of ours ran some sessions with as well. That was fun. But one thing that I noticed, and I talked with Bees about before, is that, yeah, you can make like X-Men style characters, and you might even be able to, with their rule set, be able to pull off a Spider-Man, type character, like a Nightcrawler, who's got, somewhat multiple abilities, But again, Spider-Man would be way too overpowered for the game in many ways, and so would a lot of heroes. And I wasn't looking to create a necessarily a Thor or anything like that, but the rule set kind of leaned into it and had the possibility. One of the power sets he had was transformation. So most people most people have heard of the Hulk. So think of it like the Hulk. You know, when Bruce Banner gets angry, he turns into a big green monster, hero, villain, anti-hero, whatever you want to call him for the day, depending on who's writing him. But the rule set, and again, Bees wrote stuff really well, but where I found that it was an issue is like there wasn't necessarily any sort of strength or weakness, or it was just an automatic control to kind of make it so that maybe you'd be able to give people a little bit more power, or be able to like kind of lessen their power, or make because again, in the end, this is a role-playing game. So I wanted things to be interesting. So since I'm assuming mostly going to be people who are familiar, but maybe you aren't, first appearance of Thor. He was, pretty much a guy who was Dr. Donald Blake. He walked with a cane and lost his cane and got into a fight with like something in a cave or whatever. It's been a while since I've read Journey into Mystery 15. But long story short, he found the walking stick, hit it on the ground, and transformed into Thor. Well, without that stick, he can't transform into Thor. And if we're talking about in the terms of a game, again, it's role-playing, and if you've read comics for any period of time, characters go undercover and things like that, and sometimes you might not be able to take all of your equipment in when you're doing a mission. So it just would make things more interesting. So I thought about stuff like that. When it comes to superheroes and superhero continuities, you have aliens, you have magic users. Again, Bees had set up the system more for like an X-Men style thing where, people tend to have 1 to 2 powers. But if you've got like a magic user, they've had access to a bunch of stuff. Now, if they're a low-level magic user, they might be able to do a lot, but they're not going to be extra powerful. They're just going to be able to do lower stuff, which is fine. So I started to try to develop something with that, and Bees had also already developed a full like fantasy D6 system, which I'm looking at right now, because again, it would be fun to try to meld the two together.
Oh,
I did.
that is a whole nother episode. That's probably like 6 episodes.
I did start to read it though.
Hey, you made a suggestion on the magic system. I couldn't find it on Google Drive.
I remember making a suggestion on it years ago.
Okay.
I don't remember what the suggestion was. I thought I wrote it in a comment, though. I thought it was like in the comments on the side.
Couldn't find it.
Ah, that's sad.
Written that section, but it just popped up in my notifications. This has got to be very interesting for our viewers, talking about our notifications that they're never going to see.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, if you happen to know us personally, maybe I'll let you see my notifications. Although that sounds kind of dirty, so I'll go away from there. Anyways, but like, magic use. Or if you're like, you've got, aliens, so, whether DC or Marvel fan, there's various different aliens who are heroes, villains, what have you. So if you're starting as an alien race, you're already somewhat superpowered, and it would fit into the game because we talked about, for example, in Marvel, you've got the Asgardians. Thor is an exception because he's the son of Odin, has a magical hammer, has more powers than most things. But think about like the Warriors 3. Now, Asgardians, on average, are going to be about as powerful as some of the, I'm going to say B-list maybe lower A-list superheroes. You know, some Asgardians could probably easily crack, Mark One Iron Man's armor if they hit him, but you know, most of them couldn't go toe to toe with the Hulk like Thor would. Thing would probably kick their butt too. Just thinking of all of these things, but they're still more powerful. So if you wanted to, let's say, play an alien race, or, well, Asgardians, I can count them as alien races to make it easier, then they would just start with, a level of strength and durability higher than an average human, equivalent to, like, somebody who's got, like, a base level of, like, super strength, or something like that. Think someone like Luke Cage. That would probably be, a lot of people have seen the Netflix movie, if you didn't know who Luke Cage was before, or movie, TV show. Think of somebody like that, like the average Asgardian. Again, I know that depending upon writers, don't want anybody to argue, but some writers would be like, oh no, they're much more stronger or weaker, and he's more durable. Go for it.
I want people to argue. That means they're watching.
You make a valid point. But yeah, so it would be. So we were kind of looking at that. You've got, like in Marvel, you've got like the Skrulls, who are shapeshifters. There's already a shapeshifting power, and then just give them kind of pluses or minuses. Because again, if you've read comics long enough, you're aware that while everything tends to focus on humans because, well, it's easier to identify with them as an average reader. Other alien species have, depending upon what you want to call it, they've got their own non-average people for their species, and maybe be able to make it so they have access to other powers, but we just don't want it to be game-breaking. There's going to be pluses and minuses. Going back to the Star Wars D6 system, one thing they had with the various different alien races was they would have special abilities, and they would also have limitations. So humans were even across the board, but trying to use something like a species that most people know, Wookiees, yeah, that works. Like Wookiees, they have a higher cap for their strength. So you could start off with a character who is significantly stronger than a human if you chose a Wookiee in the Star Wars world. But they also had much lower caps they could get to for, I believe it was knowledge, mechanical, and technical, I believe were the three. So in the end, it evened out. And that would just be, working on stuff like that. That would just be something we'd want to do with a superhero game. In the end, everything should even out. And speaking of breaking gameplay, we definitely did break it a couple of times, especially with the super skills. But that super skills are broken.
One of the things about D6 is that it is a skill-based game. We're talking about attributes mostly, but the attributes stop being important very early on in the game. It becomes about what your skill level is for almost all your checks, which starts with your attributes. But that's the beginning of it. So they're still important, but they're not the focus. Like, you're not rolling your attribute die for a skill you've improved under the attribute. The only attribute die that continues to be important as the number you would roll is strength. Because once and this is like 10, 15 sessions in. So if you haven't improved your skill under an attribute, you'll always roll the attribute instead of the skill level. Because your skill level is your attribute level. But strength is the only one that decided your melee damage. And so you get a big boost to start with. But under that, let's say you've got your dexterity is 2D, but your blaster skill is 5D. You're rolling 5 dice. You're not rolling the 2 dice. Those 2D dexterity don't matter much anymore. You're 10 sessions in, or 5 sessions in, you've been playing for a couple of weeks, 5 weeks, and you're not thinking about, oh no, 2D, dex, you're thinking about, okay, I've been using this blaster a lot. It works great. So I wanted to keep that, and yeah. Um, I had another point. I was gonna something you said sparked something else. Okay, go ahead. Was there something else you wanted to add, or
No, I was just going to try to help you remember, but I think you just remembered. Go ahead.
no? But I've got something better to talk about. So this session is going to be kind of boring for people who aren't into RPGs, but it's also set up probably for next week when we start talking about the story. Um, and again, we weren't at the time trying to do an X-Men game. It was an original world that Hughes created. I helped him with it, but he created it, and set in Nashville of all cities.
I
Um,
was listening to a lot of country music at the time. Still
yeah,
do.
and he wanted an original city that didn't have like everybody in the Marvel universe is in New York because that's where that was a city they knew. It took almost a decade for any of them to move out of New York. Like even Iron Man, who lived in California, most of his ventures took place in New York when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were writing. Um, but it was an original universe. It was a lot of fun, and what Tim had been thinking about lately was a story he'd been writing. And I'm sorry, Buse. What Buse has been thinking lately, you can cut that. We'll restart. Three, two, one. He won't cut this. Three,
Probably not.
three, two, one. What Buse had been thinking about lately was a Marvel story, a fan fiction kind of thing. If he was writing the Marvel universe, what he would do, the story he always wanted to tell, and he okay, a little bit of criticism of modern writing. They don't keep power levels consistent. You'll see it in movies, you'll see it in comic books, you'll see it in regular novels. If somebody loses focus or there's an editorial miss, um, your character suddenly gains the power of that they didn't have before, or that they have a weapon or something, do something that it hasn't been told to the audience that it can do. And that's just bad writing. So one of the things I do when I write is I create a D6 system most of the time for my characters in the world. Like with my D6 uh, fantasy, medieval fantasy, whatever you want to call it. I'm using that to write a story. And the power levels are consistent throughout that story because I know what their attributes are inside of this system. It works inside the system. So he started trying to figure out, I don't know if that's why you started trying to figure it out, Views, or if it was because you wanted to, or
I
it
just
just
had a
was.
story in my mind I wanted to do.
And I don't know why he started statting it, but he started statting it. And we had a conversation this week about how to create, because I never created the Kree. We weren't doing an alien storyline. So I never created the Kree. I never created the Skrull. I never created the Shi'ar. I was very careful with that particular finger. I never statted as Guardians. This is what I was going to say before. In the MCU, not in the comics, but in the MCU, the Asgardians aren't gods. They make that point very clear in the first Thor movie, the first Avengers movie, all of it. They are super technology aliens who humans would call a lot of what they do magic. Not all of it, but a lot of what they do they would call magic. Because going back to that famous, was it Arthur C. Clarke? I forget. There's a sci-fi quote. Any technology far enough advanced to people who've never seen it before would consider it magic. An example I like to use is if you went back in, if you talked about like a magic wand in medieval times, it was a long, like longer, about as long as your forearm, about yay long, maybe a little bit longer, uh, stick-looking thing that they would point at someone and a fireball would erupt out of it and kill somebody from across the room or even a longer distance. It sounds a lot like a flintlock pistol to me. You can kill someone from across the room just by pointing at them. Makes a loud bang and a flash of light. A little bit of fire. Boom, they're dead. Big hole in their chest. So, and a sufficiently advanced technology comes across as magic. And that was the explanation for the Asgardians in the MCU. And I like that explanation because it's simple, it fits. I don't have to get too complicated with how everything works. If I'm doing that, then an Asgardian is going to be someone who Odin, whoever, their race either genetically engineered themselves or were created at a much higher power level, genetically speaking. And over time, they grow into that. The MCU threw that out the window with Thor: Love and Thunder, which was just bad editing. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna stop you right there. They started to throw it out with Thor 2. They threw it out really with Ragnarok. Ragnarok, they were calling everybody gods. Love and Thunder was the last one.
Yeah, well, Ragnarok, they were calling everybody gods, but they weren't treating them like they were actually gods, and people weren't praying to them.
Point.
Like, the whole reason God Killer Boy there, oh, spoiler from the first 3 seconds of the movie I haven't seen yet. The whole reason God Killer decides to go off on his God-killing rage is because his God didn't answer him when he prayed to him. Well, Thor doesn't answer anybody in any of the Marvel Universe movies, because he's not an actual god. He's just a space alien that got worshipped when he was on Earth 700 years ago. So, taking that, I prefer that one. It's so much easier. One of the great joys of being a geek or a nerd is arguing over sci-fi and who would win in a fight. And I can't tell you how many times I got into the whole who's more powerful, Thor or whoever. And when I showed example after example in the continuity of the Marvel Universe that say Silver Surfer is more powerful or Hulk is physically stronger, they'd hit me back with, yeah, but Thor's a god. Thor's a god. Yeah, but we're talking about sheer power levels here, not about whether or not he's a deity. But that was their argument every time, is that he's actually a god, that just makes him more powerful. And when they're up against, I begin to just take that as them conceding that they don't have any more points, because the Silver Surfer is more powerful than Thor. Repeatedly, he's shown to be one of the most powerful mortals in the Marvel Universe.
And in DC, the answer is always Batman.
Thanks. Anyway, so when we were talking about this and how we would stat all this out, what we were looking for is a balance in the build, because we wanted them to start off. If you're going to start off more powerful, then you can't grow in your power as fast. It's not about trying to fit the Marvel Universe perfectly as much as it is about creating a system that's fair for all the players. Taking Monopoly, for example, everybody starts off with what, $500?
Something like that.
Something like
that, yeah.
So in Monopoly, everybody starts off with $500. The winner ends up with a lot more than that. But that's about the choices they make along the way. That's fair. In chess, you start off with 8 pieces. They're the same 8 pieces on each side. Well, in an RPG, you don't start off with the same stuff. If I've got laser eyes but not super strength, that's a balance. So, yeah, we were trying to balance that as we were walking through how to fit, Hulk. Actually, I did a pretty good thing for Hulk back in the day, because you guys requested a Hulk-style character.
Right, and so hence your transformation power.
Right.
One of the things that Bees and I were talking about was like somewhat in regards to normal people. So people like Punisher, Hawkeye, depending upon which stories you're reading, Black Widow. If you want to go to other side, you got like Batman, Blue Beetle, and even to a degree Iron Man. And what would come with them would be gadgets, for lack of a better putting it. And so we talked about that. As opposed to starting with powers, you start with gadgets or armor, and the amount of stuff that people would normally get in powers, you would get in gadgets. And maybe a bit more. Because with gadgets, you have to upgrade them. They're the same no matter what. Now, if you're a good player, you could make it last. You could make it work for a long time, possibly throughout a 3-year-long campaign. But if you're... And I'm not saying not... When I say when you're a good player, I should probably scale that back. I don't mean good player. I mean somebody who is more adept at role-playing. Because one of the fun things about role-playing is it's okay to lose. It's okay to be bad at something.
Let's make that point. One of the things D6 brought to role-playing that was never there before was that it's not about... When D&D started off, it was about completing a scenario, getting through the dungeon, and killing, if not all the monsters, collecting all the gold. That was the point of the game, was to go through a mission and succeed in that mission. What D6 did, what West End Games did, was they took that and said, no, that's not what role-playing's about. That's where it started, but that's not what it's about. It's not about completing a mission, it's about... What we're doing here is really communal storytelling. You are creating a story with your friends that is as... And you've got a set of rules so nobody can cheat or, take over and and railroad everybody else. You've got a set of rules that everybody has to play by, but together, it's really acting to a large degree. You're playing a character, you're improvising a character, whose line is it anyway style, because you don't know what's going to happen next, so you're improvising the whole time, but you're playing a character in a bigger story, and what does that character do in the moment? And that's really what role-playing, D6 is really what turned that into what role-playing games are. It was already becoming that. It started way back in 70 whatever with 72 or 4 or whatever it was with first edition D&D, but they didn't know it. They didn't have rules for that. So yeah, we're doing communal storytelling, and the stories we want to tell are about superheroes. So we needed to come up with those rules. So do we want to get it? What time are we looking at? How long have we been going? You're the one with the clock.
About 50 minutes.
You might want to push the talk button.
Well, everybody else heard me, but 50 minutes.
All right. Wow, this is going to be like one of the most boring sessions we do, I hope. I think it was still exciting. We didn't tell any of our great role-playing stories. We didn't tell the story you wanted to write. We didn't even get into how we would do the Scree and the Skrull, because we worked out a quick and dirty set of rules for all these different alien species.
Yep. And when it comes to me and Bees, this is stuff we've done forever. We come up with, whether it be story ideas or modifying systems or stuff like that. This is something that we just do for fun and stuff we just begin to knock out. Sometimes
I do it for...
Say it again?
I'd do it for money if somebody would pay me.
Yeah, me too. But
picking up, if anybody knows how to find somebody over at DC Movies who would like to listen to a pitch, I've got a great movie pitch.
And same goes if anybody knows anybody at Marvel specifically working on the What If series. But yeah, this is stuff we do. And I actually saw a quote, which I'm going to butcher horribly, earlier this week. Ed Sheeran's been in the news. I think you know who he is. But he was talking about how, when he writes songs, he writes multiple songs a day, and if a song takes him longer than a day to write, he's done with it. That's kind of like how we are with some geek stuff. We if we can't knock out a basic outline or a change to at least a good degree right away, being able to just kind of play around with stuff, we might leave it alone. And even if we do fully knock it out, we might leave it alone for a couple years and then be like, What was that suggestion you made?
You say that, and I immediately think of, all right, I'm going to eat up some time here. I created this idea. I came up with an idea. I read a book, and they had a similar idea, and I wanted to take it and make it my own, which is where good writing comes from. Don't let anybody tell you you're plagiarizing. You're not. Coming up with something unique, inspired by something else. This is the Robert Lynn Aspirin, the Dragon series there that he did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, playing poker all the time. So the idea that came to me was, what if dragons and unicorns and phoenixes and all Hydra and all these other creatures, Chimera, um, actually were based off of people who had those powers, Gorgons. Oh, I got a great scene in mind for the Gorgons. And came up with rules for how the world works, how I came up with a history of the world, and I can't get the main character right. And so I've picked it up and I worked on it and I put it down. I picked it up and I worked on it and I put it down, and I can't get the main character right. I've got the dragon who he's working with, Steve. All dragons are named Steve. Steve I've got fleshed out quite a bit. But Jack, the main character, it's not that he changes much. I just don't have the plot. The plot's not there. I built everything for this story but the plot. And I've got part of the plot, but it's not coming together. And I was just working on it a couple of months ago, and that's infuriating. Because I know some of the stories I want to tell about Steve and his daughter and his wife and his mother, especially his mother, in the battle between the dragons and the phoenixes that create this unknown world for the rest of the world. Like it's like Harry Potter, or there's all these, magic battles going on, and the average person never hears about it. These people who control the world from the shadows, and people just don't hear it. The average person never hears about it, and that has a certain amount of appeal to it. And I got, when you said that, I thought of that. I'm still trying to work out something for Jack.
If I can make a suggestion, just based on where you're going and possibly to get some inspiration, if you haven't read it, I recommend The Green and the Gray by Timothy Zahn.
I think I read that. I'm thinking of a different book by him, right? I'm thinking of like six. I've read a lot of Timothy Zahn. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. How he gets from being, what it's also a lot like is Percy Jackson.
Never read.
I haven't read. Me neither. I had a hard enough time reading Harry Potter. Look, I like Harry Potter. I do. It was an enjoyable read, but I'm not. How old was he in the first book? 11?
Yeah.
Whatever it was, 10,
yeah.
11.
Yeah, I think 11. Yeah.
And those books are aimed at 10 or 11-year-olds. And there's absolutely everything right about that. But I'm not the target audience. Reading a book for an 11-year-old is okay. It's enjoyable, but it's not. It wasn't written for me. It was hard to get through.
Yeah, I can understand that. I personally felt that as the series went on, it still aimed for the same age, but the same age you were when you first started it, so it aged with you. Kind of like Boy Meets World, the TV show. But yeah, I can see that.
And it wasn't. And when I say hard to get through, I don't mean I had difficulty reading at that level. It was just, I don't know. It wasn't hard to get through. It was hard to get into.
That's fair.
I zipped through the books like they're nothing, but like getting passionate about it's not for me. I'm not passionate about Harry Potter.
That's
and if
fair.
you want, Great. Enjoy your fandoms. Don't let anybody harsh your geekdom, okay?
Yep.
Anyway, that's probably my whole problem with Jack is he's too much of a kid and I'm too much of an adult. That's what the problem was with George Lucas when he made the prequel trilogies. He was too old. He was a grandfather. How is a grandfather going to write about, action and adventure and being annoyed at your dad and like think of all the things Luke went through in episode 4. I never get to do anything. I thought if this, season went well, I could put in my application to the academy. Luke, this is when I need you the most. I'm never going anywhere. You don't feel that as a grandfather. You've been everywhere. So anyway, I don't want to criticize the prequels too much, or be too negative. With any criticism, we should make a positive suggestion or a positive note about it. And the story he wanted to tell in 1, 2, and 3 was excellent and intriguing. How Palpatine defeated the Jedi. That overarching plot was excellent.
I 100% agree. And I also, on a personal note, I feel that the casting of Obi-Wan Kenobi as Ewan McGregor was probably one of the best choices in the prequel series.
It was good. Wow. I don't think this is going to win us a lot of viewers this week, but it was a lot of fun.
Indeed.
We'll get into maybe some stories from the superhero game next week. What you wanted to do, some of what we did with, like, the Kree and the Skrull. I started to get into that, got distracted. The Kree, the Skrull, the Shi'ar, how to handle a Spider-Man style character. It's not that Spider-Man's particularly overpowered, but compared to any one X-Man, except for maybe Colossus, he's a lot more versatile. He's pretty much the next power level up in a lot of ways. So.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank our, hopefully, viewers. And even if we have viewer singular, we appreciate you. But we will be back next week. And, well, in the comments below, feel free if there's any subjects you guys would like us to either talk about more, possibly look for in future episodes, or hey, even some ideas for us as we continue in these topics. Just anything. Feel free, put it in the comments down below. Thanks everybody very much, and you have a fantastic day.